What's better than beating the Leafs? Well, I guess blowing a second straight lead against them in the third period.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. Tonight's episode is going to be a fun one. If you enjoy some of the more comedic aspects of this Jets season, it's been not the best. And obviously, Winnipeg was coming into a game against Toronto this weekend on a 4-game win streak. That did not continue. I think the Jets are kind of in a spot where they're very fragile, and they have now found increasingly new ways to, lose games, right? That's not been a secret this year. But against Toronto, we have seen some of the worst blown leads of any Jets game this year, and it's happened now twice in a row. So we'll chat through that. We'll also talk about the Rasmus Andersson trade and how that might impact Winnipeg's own trade market. And coming up on later this evening against Chicago, we might have one of the biggest games of the season, especially if you're looking at Team Tank. Before we dive into all that, though, I did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The wildcard round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your Profit Boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Jets versus Leafs, round two. Obviously, the first round, Winnipeg lost 6-5. That was a really embarrassing game. I think the Jets at one point led, 5-2 or something, and then just completely collapsed in the third period and really at the tail end of the second period. Things just kind of got out of hand that first time, and the Jets at times did actually outplay Toronto in that first game. The second game, not quite the same story. Winnipeg definitely had a lead at various points. They had a 2-0 lead earlier in the first period, and then Matthews kind of clawed it back. The Jets then get to, that was in the second period, and then the Jets get to the third period, and Niederreiter actually gets another goal for the Jets, 3-1 up, and then of course Winnipeg kind of does what Winnipeg does and blows a 3-1 lead, which it doesn't sound terrible in some ways. 2-goal leads aren't that secure these days, but on a team like the Jets, especially considering last year how often they really did see out games and were quite good at it, it's just really depressing to see. Winnipeg has done this a lot this year. In fact, I had this sort of curiosity, right? To me, it felt like this year the Jets have blown a lot of leads, way more than they did last year. And as it turns out, no, they're not first in the league necessarily, but they are top 2, top 3 in a couple of not so great categories. So they're tied for fourth right now, which is actually kind of third place because, the most blown leads of any sort is St. Louis with 15. And then you've got Columbus and Washington tied for second with 14. And then, technically this starts at fourth with Chicago. But basically all these teams, LA, Montreal, Seattle, Utah, Toronto, Winnipeg, they've all got 13. So you might as well kind of call it like third place. But yeah, I mean, you are one of the top teams in blown leads overall. For the Jets, it starts to get a little bit less fun because they are an especially ominous company with 7 of those leads being blown in the third period. That is fourth most and just behind Toronto, who have 8. Pittsburgh and Columbus are ahead of them with 8 and 9 respectively. So not particularly great company to be in, but it just feels like this year in particular, the Jets, when they get a lead, they just, I don't know, man, they do the 6-7 thing and just completely fumble it away. They've done it a lot. It's happened multiple times this year, more so than I can recall really since maybe the Dave Lowry years or perhaps some of the Paul Maurice years. And I think, a lot of people have said the lead or the margin to reach the playoffs is only 8-9 points. And I think people are not really understanding how hard it is to close that gap. The Jets are 4-0-1 in their last 5 games, including this blown loss, and they're really not any closer than they were before. The second wild card right now is 51 points. The Jets are at 44, and they are still ninth in the wild card race. They are still behind, a good 6 other teams. And so it's just kind of like it's hard to make up that ground that you've already dropped. You have to be almost perfect. And I think this team has proven that they are very much not that. Against Toronto, game two, I think Toronto certainly led on the score sheet and in the shot clock. But I also think Toronto, to my eye, had a couple of other additional high danger chances. I will say the Jets also created some really fantastic opportunities themselves. They hit like a couple of crossbars. There were at least two instances where I was dead sure the Jets had scored, including like a Taves one late in the third that would have sealed the win for the Jets. But of course, upon further inspection and replay, it seemed like we had a couple of double dinkers, which, in the same game, not exactly the most fun for Winnipeg, but unfortunately, it is probably in the long run a little bit more helpful. It's annoying that it keeps happening against Toronto, right? This Leafs team is bad too, and the Jets somehow cannot beat them this year. It feels like ever since Mark Scheifele said that really infamous quote about what's better than beating the Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, as it turns out, just winning, period, would be nice. But the Jets have struggled to do either regular wins or beating Toronto, period. Ever since that cursed phrase, it has been a bit of a losing series against the Leafs. And the Jets have found increasingly frustrating ways this year to blow some big games against them. It was a little humiliating to hear the "Go Leafs Go" in Canada Life Center. That's just not something that you really want to see happen, right? Obviously, attendance is going to be down for Jets fans, but that loud of a chant in that game was just not great to hear. But at this point, maybe that's going to send a message to the front office that, the attendance for Jets stuff is not going to be great if this team continues to play this just mediocre to piss poor hockey. And this wasn't even the worst game the Jets have played this year, but when they play games like these, I don't really feel much of anything. You just sort of see them get a lead and you're like, well, that's not really secure. Even in the games, some of them that they won during this 4-game win streak, they got close to giving up at least one or two of those leads. So, it's just never secure. This team really can't see games out. And I think it's one of the bigger signs that this is just not the season for the team. Everyone says they don't quit and this market doesn't want the team to quit. And I hear all that, right? But there are just some very harsh realities about how this team is playing. And Winnipeg is just not up to the snuff of either a playoff team or a contender, right? And they've got some work to do. That's why, the tank isn't necessarily something they're trying to do. It's just kind of a natural result of a lot of decisions the Jets have made. And, it's ending up in games like these. Even Hellebuck has not really been his sharpest. And I saw somebody on the previous video saying we should trade Hellebuck. You can do that, and I'll tell you one thing. You are going to hate this team more than you possibly could imagine when you realize just how much Hellebuck over the years has masked some of the deficiencies of this core. He is their keystone player, and so if he's not 100%, I'll tell you, this team is not going to win very many games. Recently, past couple of nights, he's had, a 900 at least, or at least reasonably above. But that can only go so far when, the defense in front of him has kind of blown a few tires. There have been some really big missed coverages. So just not a lot seems to be working super well for this team, even despite the winning streak. You thought maybe a 5th win, you could start to see some tides turning, but I think the Jets have sort of reminded us they're in 31st for a reason, and they are not likely to move too much far above that for the remainder of the season. But amidst all that, there's a big trade boom happening right now. We've seen a major move already by the Vegas Golden Knights. They have traded for Rasmus Andersson. Want to chat about that and how that might influence some of Winnipeg's own trades, because we've got a couple of D-men who might be on the way out. We'll chat about that coming right up. The wildcard round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. You'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can use to apply to the bets you like the most. If you think that perhaps the shock loss of the Texans against the team earlier today is going to be a big thing for maybe this entire playoff side on the AFC bracket to change, maybe this is your chance to cash in. I kind of thought that Stroud was going to get over some of his hiccups and things, but the Pats just greased right through him. He threw 4 picks. It was crazy. So if you thought that maybe Stroud was going to throw multiple interceptions, well, you could have juiced those bets even more with one of these profit boost packs. Every play will always feel bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. It gives tons of weight to, those moments of momentum, the defensive plays that can really change the shape of a game, and in this case, quarterback plays. So you make your picks, then apply your profit boosts to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. All you have to do is visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we're chatting a little bit about one of the biggest trades that is already broken. Obviously, for Winnipeg, this has some pretty significant implications because it was for a major right-sided defender. And yes, the Jets are not necessarily trading anyone in that level of player on the right side. Rasmus Andersson going from Calgary to Vegas, that's not what the Jets are quite offering. However, there's been a lot of reported trade interest in Logan Stanley, and that is good news for the Jets. Now, I'm also seeing some interesting stuff coming from people who work in and around the team, and they are like, well, what happens? How's the fan base going to react if we trade Stanley and stuff? And that's not really what I want to hear, right? I get why a lot of folks are attached to Logan. He's been really fun this year, scoring lots of goals. He even had an assist against Toronto. He's been, a lot more offensively ambitious this season, but he is an expiring asset. He has had a career year, about 10 years into his development track, multiple seasons with the Jets. He is still defensively who he is. You just don't want to get suckered into paying a lot of money on a lot of term for a player having a breakout year at 28. There are some guys where they have that breakout year, but they've maybe had solid underlyings in previous seasons that told you they were a safe bet. Stanley's not that kind of guy. Andersson is a little more of a proven track record and a proven commodity. He actually commanded a pretty impressive package. He got a 27 first rounder, a 27 second rounder, which actually does convert into a first if Vegas wins the cup. And I think there was maybe one other condition. They also got Abram Wiebe, the rights to that guy from North Dakota. Don't really know a lot about Wiebe. But in terms of players going back, the biggest one that I think is actually a little bit surprising is Zach Whitecloud. Now, Whitecloud has kind of been rumored in a lot of trade, mock-ups for Vegas. They need to clear salary, and with Andersson being 50% retained, the money now works apparently to get Braden McNabb back from IR. So I'm sure Vegas was thinking about that as well when they were moving Whitecloud. But Calgary actually got a pretty good package. I would say, the one thing I wish for them was that it was maybe a 26 first, but the gamble here is that Vegas is on the decline, and even with Andersson potentially signing an extension, it doesn't change that the Knights are really seeing diminishing returns. This year for them, despite the fact that they're near the top of or at the top of the Pacific, it doesn't really feel like they are the king of very much. It's like being a king of an anthill, and they seem to not be the same team that they were in previous seasons. Defensively, they're leaky. The offensive production has kind of been good, but maybe not as terrifying as it used to be. Some of their star players are starting to show signs of aging, and the goaltending for them has been a real carousel. Plus, they've had some of the bad press around some of their signings. So Vegas is in a very sensitive position, and that 2027 first might be pretty decent, right? I don't know that it's going to be a high pick, but maybe it gets into the higher 20s, maybe even the higher teens. So if that is what Calgary is getting out of this, that's not bad, right? We saw some of the rumored packages from Boston, including a first and maybe Poitras and Lowry or something. So this package, I think, has the potential to be pretty decent, pretty comparable. And I think Whitecloud is a guy you could actually flip if you want to. He's probably a reasonably desired third pairing defenseman. Maybe some team even thinks he has the potential to be a second pairing guy. He's reasonably underrated, has pretty solid underlyings, and has been a really good depth option. So, Calgary actually got a fair return, I would say, especially for an expiring player. What this means for Stanley is I think, the Stanley market's going to be pretty juicy. Andersson was one of the biggest options out there, and Stanley his salary is a lot cheaper. He's also bigger, and everyone loves big defensemen. He's 6'7". They love that. He hits, he fights, he's fun. And he's also been, a pretty prolific goal scorer this year, one of the Jets' top goal scorers past the top line, which is really funny and a little sad to say. But, I think a lot of teams are going to look at him as perhaps a top 4 piece to cement their contention. Now, most teams probably already have a pretty top 4 set. So I would think he'll slide in on a third pairing, and maybe, the power play 2 juicing that we've seen recently with Logan, getting some reps there and some points there is going to be enough to help push him towards maybe being a more desirable offensive asset. That, I think, is really what the Jets should be sort of reinforcing. Drive that scoring up, get his score sheet looking really fat and tasty. That is going to make his trade market pretty darn fantastic. For the right side, though, it is also interesting because the Jets have Luke Schenn, right? And Schenn was thought to get a depth pick. I still think that's probably the most likely option. I don't know that there are many teams that are sort of under any real illusions about where Schenn's game is. He's been struggling enough to where it's not exactly hard to see him out there not really being defensively resolute, especially for his standards. So with Andersson gone, that now creates a huge vacuum. And I think Toronto really is the team that's going to try and make a play here. They're just on the border of being on a playoff spot. They're desperate to make a swing. I think that there's a lot of internal pressure on the coaching staff and the front office right now. So this would be a chance for them to try and deliver something of a boost. And if they add both Luke and Braden Schenn, I guess it technically adds some depth to the team. I'll be completely honest. I think it would be a huge mistake for the Leafs. But as a Jets fan, I'm like, send it. Fully do it, right? Let's open up that roster spot on the right side. Let's get Salamonson some real minutes consistently. Salamonson's looked great in his second call-up. I think he's been very calm. He's looked entirely at ease, relatively speaking. So this is the chance for the Jets to start to really transition this group over and give some of those Moose players who really are ready to make the next jump a little bit of extra runway. Now, I don't know quite the timing of how this is all going to work. I do think Toronto's going to react a little bit sooner now that Andersson is gone. I don't think that they were really in for Andersson, but they saw the Bruins trying to go for him, so maybe they think he might be, maybe the Bruins might be a Schenn suitor. I can't imagine that because Schenn's not really the same kind of player, but teams make really desperate decisions. Schenn kind of does feel in some ways like a very Bruins-y sort of physical defender. They've had guys like Carlo before. They've had a few others. So maybe Schenn kind of fits their archetype, and maybe Toronto is desperate to try and capitalize on some of their recent progress and add some depth. Again, even a depth pick, I don't care. Just get it done. I think the Jets are sitting really pretty right now, though, because some of these early trades are looking pretty promising for the trade returns. And with Winnipeg, you have a real chance not to screw this up and get some good returns. Chevy has done a lot of damage to his image in the last year and a half. This is where he can start to rehab that and show us that he understands the future of this team, the present, and how to get from a bad present right now to a much better future. I think the prospect returns and pick returns the Jets could get could really help to boost this team and give us some future support, because we still have plenty of good years of Hellebuck and likely Scheifele, Connor, and Morrissey to go. So, throwing it out and just thinking of the short term, probably not the most helpful. Let's get some picks, let's get some assets back, and turn this team around in the next couple of seasons. Curious to know what you think of the Andersson trade, though. Was this a deal that you expected? Do you think it's going to be, decent for Vegas? Do you think it'll move the needle? And do you hope that it'll help us set the market for, of all people, Logan Stanley? A lot of trade interest. Hope it's not an extension thing that happens first for the Jets. Would prefer that we make the most of our trade assets and get us some good futures. But closing us out tonight, I also wanted to chat a little bit about this upcoming game against Chicago. This has the potential to be, quite frankly, one of the biggest games of the season for the Jets. It is a little early, but given where both the Hawks and the Jets are in this tanking race, it is a very important result for both teams. We'll chat about why coming right up. If you've ever hired somebody who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how hard it can be to replace them. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed's sponsored jobs. Indeed can help you put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster with their sponsored jobs post. I've used Indeed when I was looking for work several years ago. The resume builder is clear, concise, and it helps you match to not only your work experience, but also your salary requirements. And for business employers, really looking for folks who fit the bill, who give them the exact experience and skill sets they need, this is a great chance for them to hire the best employees and candidates they can find. And according to Indeed's data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored job posts. It makes a real difference. It gets you results faster, and you'll be matched with tons of quality candidates nearly instantly. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we're just wrapping up really quickly with some big thoughts ahead of Winnipeg versus Chicago later this evening. This is a massive game for both teams. Now, I know we are not even at the 50-game mark just yet, but when you really think about it, only having a little over 30 games left in the season, this really is starting to get into the home stretch. You know, we're towards the halfway point of January. We're going to have a break in a few weeks with the Olympics. But we really are rolling closer and closer to everything from the trade deadline to the end of the season, right? We are well past the halfway mark. This is kind of a big moment for the team. And for the Jets, having just lost really embarrassingly to Toronto in pretty bad fashion, they're feeling wounded. I'm sure they were really feeling like things were turning around. And then they have a game that sort of reminds you of what they've been this whole year. Chicago also kind of licking their wounds. They haven't been quite as terrible overall in some ways, but by the same token, you know, the Spencer Knight stuff was carrying them for a while. They're now down Bedard and some of their other young players. I think Nazar's been out for a while. So this Chicago team has really been in rough straits. They've lost 3 straight. They need some sort of a response. They are looking to try and salvage something, although at this point they probably are hoping to stay towards the bottom of the NHL right now. That prospect pool still probably needs 1 or 2 more pieces before they feel that they are in a much better contention spot. With the Jets being just 1 point behind Chicago with the game in hand, you know, this has the potential to be, you know, a potentially really big outcome for both teams, right? Chicago could leapfrog a couple of the squads ahead of them, both St. Louis and Calgary. Calgary has been winning a fair few games. The Blues have as well, relatively speaking. They're both operating at around a 500 pace right now, which given what we sort of saw and expected from them at the beginning of the season, I was a little surprised they've been doing that well, relatively speaking. And, you know, it's definitely a chance for the Jets to perhaps push themselves back a little deeper in this wild card race. Now, listen, right, the Jets are going to try very hard. They're probably going to come away with at least a point in this game, I would think. But I would not anticipate that, you know, this Hawks team is going to drop a 4th straight. They very well might, and perhaps this is a not close game. But, you know, I think with how the Jets have been this year, even a lead against Chicago may not be that secure. And Winnipeg's away record has not been very good. At home, the Jets are pretty darn resolute. They don't tend to, lose as many games as they do on the road. But this is a road game, right? And it's a later road game. So for the Jets, I think it's probably, not the easiest win here. It used to be that Chicago was a team you could just sort of walk through and it'd be fine. I don't think that's necessarily the case, even with Bedard out. I do think Bedard has actually started to come back and is starting to feel a little bit healthier. Nazar is still out, so that's not going to be the biggest help for them. But I mean, Bedard is still Bedard. You know, he's got Burakovsky at his hip. they've been able to at least create some offense. And I think Burakovsky, while Bedard was injured, was doing some really good stuff. But, I mean, in terms of like a lot of the matchups, right, you have to beat up on guys like Ryan Donato, Nick Lardis, Colton Dock, and Landon Slager, which for the Jets is probably not that hard. But, whether Hellebuck will be sharp, maybe we'll see Comrie. They've got a back-to-back with St. Louis the next day, so they are going to have to sort of balance some of that and make sure that they are on pretty good footing here as they come into this week. So 2 big games, but this first one for the Jets against Chicago, I think this is the one that I would say is even bigger and more important for them to potentially not come away with a big result. For Chicago, they are still technically within touching distance of the playoffs. I think that they're going to be very motivated to try and turn things around. Bedard being back and, being Bedard, potentially putting them only 4 points out of a playoff spot after they've missed the postseason so many times. They might be, feeling pretty hungry and looking for a result here to get them a little bit closer to that last wild card spot. I'm sure they're not really eager for it in some ways, but, as everyone always says, NHL teams are never going to intentionally tank like they did before. And I think for the Jets and Hawks, they're both still operating under the assumption and the mindset that the season is not yet lost. We've seen some other teams elsewhere saying that they're out and that they're done. St. Louis has said they're a seller. The Rangers just announced that they're selling too. But both Chicago and Winnipeg have yet to throw in the towel. So we'll see how much longer that lasts. The more games that they continue to drop and the further they slip back in this race, maybe reality will start to set in a bit more for both teams. But later this week, I actually do want to talk about some of the guys the Jets could be in line to draft. I know that that's not exactly the most promising discussion in some ways, because it does mean that, at least I expect this team to finish in the bottom 5 of the NHL, even with 30 games left. But I promise you, this year's temporary pain is going to lead to something really good. If you want this team to keep winning in the future and really be good long-term, we just have to suck it up for at least a year or two. I'm really hoping that it's more like 1 year and not 2. You add a big prospect this year. You add some supplementary prospects from the draft. Maybe you get some big picks in some of your trades that you make. This is your chance to turn things around in a very quick time scale, a lot faster than what we may have worried about in previous years. But to get there, we have to maybe eat some dirt for at least the remainder of the season. But I promise you, with some of these prospects and from some of the footage I'm seeing, they are very exciting. I think they have a chance to really transform this Jets franchise. And we'll chat about some of those guys later this week, probably Wednesday or Thursday and Friday. We'll have a couple of prospect profiles and talk about some of the guys who could be available to the Jets anywhere in the top 5 to 6 picks. But for tonight's show, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow ahead of Winnipeg versus St. Louis. Going to be a big game. Hopefully, the Jets at least put up a good fight tonight, and we'll see you there for tomorrow's game. So have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.